From the get-go, I've always wanted to have an offering that if you gave me $1, you were getting $2 or $3 back. I just want to be known as the guy as like, you got to work with Owen because he's going to make you more money and he's going to teach you a bunch of stuff and it's going to be a win-win. That's like always the mentality of how do I continue to create better offerings, refine them, or move this thing along.
Welcome to another episode of This is the Way with Artin and Michael. So this is a special episode as we have our first official guest. Before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe and follow. Okay, let's go. So our first ever guest is Owen Sammarone. I actually met Owen a couple of years ago after I launched my book, and I was super impressed with Owen. Don't let his age fool you, younger age. So when Michael and I were talking about, hey, we should do an episode around, what are some top books that you should read if you're pursuing, a career in the corporate world or if you're pursuing entrepreneurship, my mind quickly went to, we got to get Owen on this episode because that's what Owen does. But let me read a quick little blurb about Owen.
Wait, his background, you wouldn't know that though. Let's just be clear there. Who would know that with all those books behind him?
Exactly. So Owen is an entrepreneur, a voracious reader, and a former Division I basketball coach. That's kind of where he had me as soon as he said that. He is the founder of Unleash the Knowledge, a community promoting self-education through nonfiction books, and has amassed a following of nearly 200,000 followers in 3 years. That's no small feat. Unleash the Knowledge has a branch serving nonfiction authors as a digital marketing agency. Before starting what began as a brand and then business, Owen spent 6 years working in college basketball, all under 2023 NCAA basketball coach Dan Hurley at both Yukon and University of Rhode Island. He loves all things digital business building, audience growth, monetization, and community, and of course, books, as you can tell from from his background. And that's an impressive background he has. It's not virtual, guys. It is legit. And he color coded it. So, Owen, just because I'm such a big fan of basketball, you can see the Kobe jersey behind me. I want to know just about that Division I basketball experience and how did you even get to work within Division I basketball?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Artin and Mike, for having me. Excited for this conversation. So the basketball journey was something super interesting, something I kind of just found out of thin air. So I got to University of Rhode Island, 18 years old as an undergrad. A couple weeks go by, probably only 2 weeks, and I'm starting to find the groove of like, all right, it could either be life in the dorm, playing video games and drinking alcohol and doing all the other fun things that college kids do, or I could like really make this the most great experience for myself. Fortunately, I leaned towards the latter and I really tried to find what I could really be spending my time doing. So always been a sports guy, always loved basketball. Knew the team was kind of on the rise. Knew Coach Hurley was a Jersey guy. I'm from New Jersey as well. So a lot of the stars aligned in that sense. But I didn't know Coach whatsoever. So I took a trip down to the Rhine Center, which is the home arena, one day after like math class, business math or something. And I'm like scoping around the whole place. I'm checking out the third tier like arena for a team that's like not very good at that point. The arena is beautiful. It's like state of the art. So I was in awe going around the arena, being this new kid away from family, living the college life. And I found this one door that was open with the light on, and it's literally out of like a movie. Like it had the bell. I rang the bell. No one's at the front desk. This woman pops out from behind the door. She's like, "Hey, can I help you?" I was like, "Hey, listen, I'm a young freshman, 18-year-old, super bored, super trying to figure out what I'm going to do during these 4 years. But all I know is I love sports and I love basketball. I want to get involved. I don't know what that looks like, but just point me in the right direction." So long story short, she connected me with the ops guy. I had an interview. They brought me to practice the next day. They were like, "Hey, pull up a chair. Just see if this is something you want to do." From the get-go, I was like, I don't need to watch a practice. Like, I'm ready to go. Like, let's do this. And honestly, spent a lot of waking hours in that gym. I became the head manager. I was a trusted person for Hurley. My senior year, we had a lot of success. We made it to the March Madness tournament for the first time in almost 2 decades. We won the A10 championship. We ended Trae Young's season my senior year, which was exciting. And so many intangibles came from that experience, but it all started, I guess, from me just kind of seeking out the opportunity and, still had some good fun in college, but spent a lot of time in the gym and working towards helping these players kind of be better players and then doing a lot of operations stuff. And, that ultimately led me to Yukon to keep going.
Were you a big like ball player before that yourself, or?
So that's like the irony of the story. I was a lacrosse player in high school. I actually, in Artin, you might not even know this, I didn't play high school basketball. I was 5'4" freshman year of high school, super discouraged. My brother was a wrestler, so like didn't really have too many. I mean, I've always loved the game. I always went to the NBA store growing up in New York City and get a jersey and a matching pair of shorts of, Manu Ginobili or Allen Iverson when he was on the Nuggets. And had birthday parties at basketball gyms, etc. But just the height and the athleticism wasn't quite there in high school, so I didn't play. So that just makes this whole story even crazier. Like to have two Division I championship rings, and I wasn't even someone who like, oh, maybe I was an all-star in high school, but I just wasn't quite good enough to get to D1. No, it was like I could barely even hang with JV kids, and I was now playing pickup with Division I players. So
It's amazing.
um, yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I've played pickup with Division One players, but like at playgrounds,
Yeah.
and I'm not a tall guy. I can hold my own on a playground with your average player, but I could tell the difference. When I was on the court with a Division One player, you're like, holy crap, these guys are great. And then I can always think about, I'm like, damn, if these guys are so good, imagine playing against NBA guys. It's just different.
When I got to Yukon, I played in a pickup game, and I swear one guy jumped at the nail, which is like the middle point of the free throw line, and I really thought he could have a good 5 minutes in the air just to decide what he wanted to do, shoot, pass, and I'm just like in awe watching him. And I'm like, okay, there's levels to this. It's clear where I'm at and where they're at. And that guy who I thought was going to be an NBA player, unfortunately never made it. And I mean, he's having a great career overseas. But yeah, to your point, the NBA guys are even on a whole nother level.
Yeah. What would you say from like a leadership perspective as you watched Coach Hurley? What are the things you learned? Because there's when it comes to coach, especially college coaches, I being a fan of basketball, I always think of especially Division One as a coach driven team versus NBA that's kind of superstar driven.
Mm.
And the coaches in Division One, I mean, it's all about leadership and coaching. So, what were your biggest takeaways and learnings from Coach Hurley?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the biggest things is just like every day attacking the day and like not letting up and just having that mentality that you are the leader and people are looking at you to set the tone. Like even when I got to Yukon where I had a much closer touch to coach, it was just day in and day out, like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Just he was about his work and he was about setting that level of excellence. The other big piece is, I guess, not so much. Well, I guess it ties into him himself and a leader, but for my experience as a manager who was a manager of other managers too, is reliability and having that ability, like just knowing that you could be called upon at any moment and ready to go. I was for better or worse, like being always on call, having that just having that presence around other people that it's like, all right, if there's a fire or we need help somewhere, like Owen's the person to call, or Artin or Mike or whatever. Like having that presence, I think, had served me as extremely well during URI. That ultimately, I think, got me to Yukon as well. And there's a balance between being a yes man and being reliable, in my opinion. Um, because it's more about just like seeing the larger image and then or the larger presence of what you're doing and then moving the whole moving the process along to whatever that end goal is. So yeah, reliability, just having that excellence mentality, I think has been big for coach. Never had an issue with coach on this front, but you see the news and it's bad, like having that off the court balance as well. Like coach never has had any issues off the court or has ever been in the media, but you see players or coaches or, like the recent news was the West Virginia coach, Bob Huggins, got a DUI. great coach, legendary name, has had a lot of success. Now he's out of a job because he got a DUI. So like it's and that's a big thing for the players too. Like life off the court can absolutely dictate your life on the court and your success on the court. So I think Hurley was a great example of just kind of being about his stuff when he was on the job and when he was off the job. And I think that as a leader too is instrumental as well.
Yeah, I mean, leading by example. I mean,
Yeah.
you're dealing with players that are some of them still teenagers and very young men, and they need that example in their life to show kind of how you should be conducting yourself as a Division One player.
Especially back to what you had said, at that point, a lot of people enter college, and it's kind of like there's this sort of mentality. Oftentimes, like it's I don't want to call it party time, but for a lot of people, that's literally that mentality. So I think it becomes even more important then. And just to highlight something you had said before that I love, and I think Artin and I had the similar mentality when we were going to film school. We were those students who would pull the all-nighters working on our projects. Like that was it. Like when you find these things you dedicate yourself to and you love them, so much like that. Some people, sometimes I remember people saying this to me of like, oh, you're spending too much time where you need to relax more. I'm like, but this is fun. Like if you can really enjoy what you're doing, like that's critical. And it sounds like you definitely found that.
Yeah, there's a great story of Hurley that his wife told me. Like he's fresh out of school. He didn't go the professional route. He knew his joke is like, we played Georgetown because he went to Seton Hall, so he was in the Big East back then. He went up for a jump shot, and Alonzo Mourning, who ended up being a Miami Heat legend, just blocked the crap out of his shot. And he was like, that was the moment when I knew I was a coach. But the funny story is his wife, Andrea, like couldn't find him one day when he was an young assistant at Rutgers. And she found him in the film room, no windows, like small VHS, whatever, set up in the monitor. And he's got like bags under his eyes because he's so locked in on what he's doing. And I think it's just that dedication and you guys can relate to this too. Like when you connect with people that are entrepreneurs or creatives or passionate about their work, like you see eye to eye with that. But then when you speak to someone who's not on that mentality, they're like looking at you like you have 50 heads. And I mean, my message is for everyone to find whatever that work is that makes them think that it's play. But unfortunately, it's not a high percentage of folks. But that type of work is what makes, I think, everything just worthwhile and enjoyable.
It sounds like you've found that a couple of times in your life because you've transitioned to this other world now too. And I'm curious to understand. Unless Art, you had another question you wanted around this specific. I'm curious.
No, I think it's a good segue. Yeah, it's a good segue. I mean, when did Division One basketball coaching and Unleash the Knowledge begin? I mean, how was the mental part first? Like, what drove you to actually look for that opportunity?
Yeah, it was a 9 to 12 month journey. So it was not overnight. It was something I battled with constantly because I was at, again, for someone who didn't play high school basketball, nevertheless college basketball, to be at the threshold of Yukon, like you'd be nuts to say no to that, but it was not for me anymore. But the transition was, well, I'll be completely honest. Because of that background of mine, I always felt at a disadvantage. I always felt if I went up against a crappy former D1 player for a coaching job, he's probably going to get it just for his resume versus me. And that's not totally true because, I can still hustle. I could still be great at X and O's. I could still be a great recruiter, et cetera. But all things considered, I would always think he would get it. So that started to push me away a little bit. But then secondly, I just became more in love with the personal development side of things and how coach was taking on the day. And I would go into his office. He would have Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss books on the table. He'd be listening to Lewis Howes on podcasts. He'd tell me to print out a blog. I'd print out 2 copies. I'd read one. He'd read one. So like I was this massive sponge without him probably knowing it. But, I'm sure he knows hindsight now that, obviously he's been a big impact on me in a good way. But I was falling out of love with the X and O's in basketball. And to be honest, my position, even though it might sound cool or whatever, it was a babysitting job. I was really taking care of these players on a day-to-day job. So there's not too much money in basketball in the beginning days. Not that I'm money centered, but like obviously you got to take that into consideration as you want to like see your family and live a good life. So to answer your question, I just became more infatuated with the personal development side of things and what makes a champion and the mentality and people like Ray Allen and Kemba Walker were like coming through our gym, so I was getting to meet obviously some significant all-stars in the NBA, and I was just kind of capturing all that data. um and that married with the idea of like, you know, when am I ever going to be a coach? Probably 35 years old. I'm going to have to wait like a whole decade of eating crap to get, and I might get there, and then I might get cut. It's a cutthroat business. I might get axed the next day. So I started just kind of, all these things were just kind of coming to fruition. It was like, all right, I want to be in a place of control. I want to be in a place where I have freedom. I want to be in a place where I'm creative and can let my best interests kind of show the world. So, I started sharing books on Instagram. That's how it started, and I named it Unleash the Knowledge. And the core focus for starting Unleash the Knowledge has always been the focus, and it still is today. Is I was always lacking that community of big thinkers and people that wanted more out of life. And there's nothing wrong to the 9 to 5 or people that want to work in some position, like whatever. We all might have to do it at some point, but I always felt that I was destined for more or wanted to push boundaries. So that was the core reason for starting the community. Books was just the vehicle to kind of share, or the content to share. Um, and that happened in September of 2019, and then COVID happened March 2020. So I had like 9 months of a runway, which is also like an underlining type of mentality I have where, yes, you should be all about plan A, but I'm not like the biggest advocate for like forget plan B, C, D. And when I say that, like, worst case, I could go back to basketball, or worst case, I could go use my master's degree that I got at Yukon. Like, it's not like, oh, I'm scared to take the risk. I have a plan B in mind. It's like, oh, there's always going to be a couple safety nets that I'll build. So I started the brand kind of thinking that what's next? Like maybe this can turn into something more. Um, and it was January 2020, so 3 months prior to COVID, 6 months into building the brand, that this heart surgeon reached out and was like, "Hey, man, just released a book. It's a memoir. I'm from Northern Jersey, so I was like, okay, there's another thing that's interesting." He's like, you have 30,000 followers. Can I pay you to share the book? And that was like the aha moment, the light bulb, where I was like, oh, there's something here. I had no intention of building a business. I didn't even know a business could be created. I didn't know anyone else monetizing audiences at that time. And then that really just like changed everything. And then, you know, January happened, February happened, and then COVID happened. And I was like, all right, I was like, I'm done. I was like, this basketball thing was great. 6 years. I think I milked the most of it for the experience and the knowledge. But the next step would have just been taking those steps to go become a coach. And that dream was dying while the new dream of building something of my own was growing. And then I left, and, COVID happened, and I was reading, and I started doing outreach, started growing the brand more, and kind of been the day-to-day life for the past 3.5 years.
That's
But in some ways,
awesome.
you're a coach anyway. It sounds like now you're just a different coach.
I know, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, so many of those skill sets or things I learned, I think are massively, interchangeable beyond, like, from industry to industry.
It's interesting that you talked about you didn't have a plan to build a brand. It just happened. And I see that happen so frequently where somebody does something because they just enjoy it. And because they just enjoy doing something, good things kind of start having a domino effect, and one thing lead to another, versus coming into it with this big grand idea, and then you just get lost in the big grand idea versus just the baby steps and just doing it for fun. I hear that story all the time, and it's very interesting. And it goes kind of counterintuitive of, well, you should, when you're doing something, have a plan. But sometimes not having
Yeah.
a 5-year plan works too.
Yeah, and you guys might know better than me. Like, I don't know the right or wrong answer to that. I think the biggest takeaway I've learned from those early days was how authentic I was with creating the content, because I was not transactional. I wasn't even thinking that I could make money. So I was just like pouring my heart, I guess, into like sharing these books or the content from the books. And I really believe that's a big piece of why it's turned into what it is today. But yeah, I think there's also a healthy balance of like having some sort of vision. But then you gotta, I know tons of people that are on the 5-year vision without taking step number one. And I'm like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? I'm like, we got to get this thing going. So
Yeah.
And that's where I think it's like value and discipline, because I think for some people, when they do jump into it, they jump into it with that vision perhaps, but if they're not actually taking those steps or they're not actually adding value, then they get frustrated and give up because they're like, well, forget it. I'm not getting to, the Fortune 500 company I've dreamed of, even though they've only given it a month and they haven't, seen it yet. So I think that's key. And you were adding all the value. And if you add enough value, eventually, the benefits, not only are they there for obviously people you're adding value for, but it starts coming back, I think, at you as well. And it's just consistency is the other one. My son right now, he's got a YouTube channel he's trying as well. And obviously Art and I, as we launch our podcast, it's another one. And my son and I, we have friendly competition right now, I say, because he's, he started his channel a little earlier. He still got us on these subscribers. We're going to eventually catch up to him. But that is the one thing that's been key and critical, is at times if his aren't growing as fast, he's like, why? But it all comes down to discipline, because you have days where you deliver something and it's not received as well. And I think, again, a lot of people might just at that point give up. But if you really are, enjoying what you're doing, it makes it that much easier to keep going. And it sounds like you definitely were doing that with the books. In some ways, it was probably a way to help cement the learning in your own brain too, when you shared it with other people. It's another huge benefit.
yeah, like even to your son's point of putting out consistent videos. Like for me, I didn't want to miss a day. That was like my big thing. Like, I'm going to post every day, and I still think this way. Like, I'm obviously nowhere near where I probably want to be, but like, I know if I keep the daily actions going, it's going to compound, and the goodwill will come back. And if the focus is we're going to put out one podcast episode a week, or we're going to do one video a day, it's inevitable that you're going to grow, and you're also going to learn and pivot and be able to gain more wisdom from people that it might be a couple steps ahead of you, and then you can tweak things. But you got to get the skin in the game. You got to be the man in the arena. You can't just plan the amazing plan to just never execute upon it.
Did you make the jump before you were making the amount of money that you were in your other job? Or did you just say, no, the potential's here, I'm making the jump, I'll figure it out?
Yeah, no, I was like, it's COVID. I'm moving back home with mom. Like, I got no money to my name. I mean, actually, that's maybe I don't think about this enough. I did have a couple more paychecks coming in from Yukon. So I guess I did have a bit of a financial safety net that I knew was coming. It was the validation from January with that heart surgeon who had already transacted. And I think a couple more came probably while I was still in basketball. So it was, because, I'm a risk taker, but like, I can also have my tail between my legs and shaky knees. Like, I'm not saying like I really jumped the boats or burned the ships and had nothing. Like, I strategically knew if I were to take this, because I knew, like, again, who's crazy enough to say no to Yukon? Like, you got a promotion, for what it's worth. It was a promotion. It wasn't very crazy, but like, I knew I had to have something set in stone that could turn into something more. But I mean, the stuff I do today was not a thought. I didn't even know I could do it. So there's been new service offerings. There's been new ideas. I mean, I've also invested a ton into myself. So I'm just, actively learning, but yeah.
What was your thought process around, okay, I'm now doing this on Instagram, actually using my community to promote books? What's the next step? What's the next offering? Like, at what point did you start to think about expanding the business?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing, and I'm still figuring this out today. I mean, I've had success, but I'm continually to refine the process. From the get-go, I've always wanted to have an offering that if you gave me $1, you were getting $2 or $3 back. And the book promos, even though they're valuable and there's many byproducts that come from it, there's not that clear like $1 in, $2 out type of model. So that's where I've just constantly always thinking like, what's the next thing? So there's been the coaching, which has been really successful because that's clear. I can pretty much like mold my thoughts around someone's offering. that I know works because I've seen other people or I've had success in the past, and I could see those numbers jump. There's some ads work that I'm exploring right now that's showing some promise, but that's like whether that's right or wrong, I guess. Like that's just or achievable or not within my industry. I'm always constantly thinking like I just want to be known as the guy as like you got to work with Owen because he's going to make you more money and he's going to teach you a bunch of stuff and it's going to be a win-win. So I guess that's like always the mentality of how do I continue to create better offerings, refine them, or move this thing along.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at some point you went from being a one-man team and you start actually building a team, right?
Yeah, so I've brought on a full-time operations manager because it's a lot to do it all, right? You got to be selling, you got to be creating content, and in the nature of like book promotion specifically, there's a ton of fulfillment. We got to create the content, we got to read the book, we got to do all that good stuff. So it was getting to a point where I was like, I need some help. So yeah, I brought someone on to kind of help me with the fulfillment on the book promo side, which has been great. And then, just got a couple VAs here and there for some graphic design work. But, that's another thing I guess I'm teetering with. Like, I don't think I really have the mentality to go build some massive team or and actually I really think about when I think about offerings and services, I think of, does it take a lot of manpower to fulfill on this, or could this be fulfilled by myself or a few other people? So obviously that's a tough, there's not too many answers. I feel like, I mean, it's easy to think of new ideas, but then it's hard to say, that could be fulfilled by a couple people. So the managing from basketball is coming to fruition today. And there's, some people definitely supporting me on this, on this initiative recently.
And did you use primarily time as your decision criteria to say, okay, I need to at least bring one and a half person to help me? Time was the main reason.
Time was big. The other piece was just really getting clear on what should I be doing, and the efforts that I put in, will that further the business along? So the easy answer is selling. I mean, that's the bet. Like that's where if your time is allocated towards selling, that's what's going to grow the business, obviously. So and I've grown tremendously as a salesperson because again, coming from basketball, like no knowledge on any of that. So that's been such a interesting journey. But yeah, then it was like, okay, do I really need to be involved in the fulfillment process? And then I started learning about systems and SOPs and how I can actually teach someone to do something. And I was like, oh, wow, this book promo fulfillment can be fulfilled by, I mean, for lack of a better way to say it, like a monkey. Like anyone can really do this. Like it's a pretty straightforward process. You got to read the book, find the great themes and takeaways, and then we got to turn it into something that's attractive for people to consume. So yeah, a couple thought processes of like, where should my best time and effort go towards? Is there a direct correlation to making money on that effort? And then how easy or how efficiently can I delegate or coach someone else to do a task that I don't really need to be involved in anymore?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up SOPs. I think I saw Mike chuckle a little bit too, because when we were back at Disney and then, Mike also at Netflix, that's the world we lived in. We were operators and it was all about SOPs and efficiency and cost savings and how to do things better, faster, cheaper. And
Yeah.
so totally relate. And it makes a difference. And I feel like, and I'm going to speak for Michael too, that is in our DNA now because we did it for so long that anything we get into, getting the operations set up quickly is like what we do, and it actually pays dividends. I don't know, Mike. What do you, if you
No, yeah, and I also always find, for me, I used to joke, and I don't know, maybe it's not a joke, and just say, "Well, I was just lazy and looking for the easy way out." But like when you thinking about process, SOP, automation, any of that stuff, for me, it just huge benefits. I think, especially for those of us who get bored with doing certain tasks a fair amount of time. Obviously, there's a whole value equation people might look at too. Some people argue and say, if it's going to cost you, anything less than $50, hire it out. Obviously, depends on where you're at and how much you're making. But for me at the time when in art, and I think too, when we both started going down that way and it really helped our career tremendously, it was often just being like, okay, we learned this, we understand it. Let's now try to find a way to, make it more standardized or automated. And that's, what for us actually continue to propel our careers, because we kept doing that. It just started getting bigger when we're like, well, let's develop automated tools that can take and create these media files or, you know, what have you, and deliver them out around the world, localization, so on and so forth. So I feel like that's huge for people to make that transition when you go from that, I call it IC, into this mentality of, no, actually you're a value creator in terms of how you can maximize time, I guess is one way to look at it.
Yeah, and I'm sure. I mean, that could be a whole podcast episode in its own, because you got. I mean, just for our experience gap here, like I'm. I mean, the recent like 6 to 12 months, I've been super focused on that type of stuff, and I've been really reluctant to it because it's one of those things. I guess you really have to kind of rewire your mind to say, okay, we're going to put in the upfront work here. That's also tedious. Like what we're already doing is tedious, but we're also going to put up this upfront work that's tedious to kind of build out this system, because it's going to save us time down the road. And then like it's like, what? Like that, I don't want to go do that now. Like, why don't I just keep doing what I'm doing? And I'll speak for myself, really. Like I'm quick to not do that. I'm quick to just be like, all right, we'll do that tomorrow or something. Like when you suck it up and go do it, it's pretty transformational.
Well, and I think it sometimes takes the push, you know, that then gets you to do so, because again, you were like, okay, how do you scale yourself? And it's difficult to scale yourself unless you can solve for that. And I think the other thing a lot of people struggle with too, that could tie into a lot of this, is when people start thinking about how you measure, you know, certain aspects of it, like the measurement side of it for people, or the act of getting some of those measurements in so that you could then look at performance and think about that. A lot of people struggle with, and it's not their favorite thing. And some people even see it as the enemy, because like in workplaces, a lot of team members are like, you're measuring me. And I'm like, no, the way I see it is, I mean, there may be a measurement there for you, but you shouldn't think about it as measuring you. I like to think about it in terms of, you know, pilots on an airplane. They have loads of different gauges and things they're looking at. And ultimately for you, what are your gauges that are going to help you and that you want, because you know it's going to drive you forward? Like those are the people who stand out as the top performers. So I get passionate about it, obviously.
Definitely. No. I love that. I love that pilot analogy. Yeah, I'm not quite there yet in terms of like true metrics and performance and all that good stuff. But that's if you're trying to build something larger, there's just a simple cap you're going to hit in terms of money in the door and how many hours you have in the day. And once you get to that realization, you got to start thinking in a different way. And no one teaches you that. So we've all had to learn it, you know, as we go.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I'm curious, as you have talked about your business a bit, like, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about like your vision, a bit of where you are today, and a lot of those, you know, key ways that you add value. I know you touched on that a little bit, but also where do you see your business moving into the future?
Yeah. You know, a big like message I just want to continue to share is, so I work with nonfiction authors. Like they've already done the hard work to write the book, but they don't quite have the whole other pieces in place. And I almost like, you know, will throw shade or, you know, speak poorly about like the publishers or the marketing agencies, because no one really voiced this to them. Like you got to build the audience, you got to have the email list, like we got to have kind of these systems in place to bring new people in the door, etc. So I guess the current vision or mission is just to continue to impact these authors and I guess break the stigma that authors can't get rich is kind of a good way to put it together. And just what I'm doing essentially is I'm taking the modern day creator model, which is any Joe Schmo who's got knowledge they want to monetize, but pairing it with someone who actually has something great to share because they went through great experiences or they wrote the dang book and they actually have something to show for. They just, I guess, either are too fixated on the book sales, which, you know, we know is $3-4 a sale, but really showing them the book is a tool. It's a vehicle to far more. So how can we kind of build out this whole other world? You know, and then I use, of course, just the case studies of the Tony Robbins or the Ryan Holidays and the James Clear. And it's clear. It's clear that they don't care so much about the book sales. You know, Tony Robbins is the easy example. Obviously, he's, you know, up in the clouds, but like he, you know, wants that 5, 10, 15K check from you to go to his business mastery or his day with destiny. So if he's got to give away a ton of free books, like heck, he'll do it. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm honestly also in a place where I'm just continually do experiment. Like something new I'm doing is helping people write their LinkedIn posts, like kind of help them guide through the platform of LinkedIn and how you can make money on it and grow and monetize a following, even if you have a small following. Because I've had some success there. So it's just I'm still in a very like startup mentality. Like let's just continue to grow skills and upskill and find new ways to impact folks. But and then beyond that, like I got to write my book. So there's the whole plan of when is it going to be the moment to move away from the Unleash the Knowledge faceless brand to who is Owen Sammarone. And I guess in a good way, it's the ego that's stopped me from that, of the opposite of the ego, where it's like, I'm not ready for that. I don't want to do that yet. When most people are like, oh, no, I got the best thing to share ever. I got to go be that person now in lights. So there's that I'm sure in the next decade will definitely be projects I'll work on.
Yeah, no, that sounds awesome. It's funny when you mentioned how writers could take their book and then how it might actually turn into other ways to, monetize if that's their goal or what have you. And some of the other individuals that you mentioned, I can't help but think about the similarities to music industry. And it's like getting an music out there is one thing. It's when you hit the concerts and when you hit all of these other things afterwards, that it starts becoming a bit more of a big deal. So I definitely, think that applies.
That's a great point, honestly. And I don't think people think about that at all. And I probably learned that probably in the last 2 years, that the lion's share of an artist's money is coming from the concert. And if COVID happens or they can't get on stage, they're screwed. Like, I mean, I don't know all the details, but the whole, like, who owns the masters of like their music, or even like YouTube, ad revenue, like they're making pennies from all that type of stuff. Even when you see like, oh, he sold 500,000 units on Spotify. Like I saw a post recently. It's like, I don't know, $500. Like it's like a ridiculous low amount of money. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, I guess, stigma changing I'm trying to push within the publishing world. And it's, it's been good because you can now write a book, whenever you want. You can go publish on KDP tomorrow and move that thing forward. So,
but the book almost becomes that lead magnet in many ways for a lot of individuals. And I think somebody else that comes to my mind right now is like Alex Hormozi out there, and his books, and he's making this huge, with his $100 million leads. This is next one, I think, is what he's calling it.
Yeah.
And it's like he's proven, the system of leads as he builds this up and does it. But ultimately, all of that just feeds his other businesses that then feeds his income. And I think a lot of these writers, since they're usually writing about something that they, know, it's usually some skill close to them, kind of like with Artin's book, in that scenario. It's like, well, ultimately, you have that skill and knowledge, you're sharing it with people, but a lot of times people are now looking for that one-on-one, which could lead to the consulting or the coaching that way, or the course, or it could lead to speaking, or it could lead to, there's so many opportunities that it goes to. And I actually also think it's a great way for individuals who might not want to continue the 9 to 5 their whole lives and may want to take these skills. And I know not everybody's working 9 to 5 or it's a book, but because now maybe that's what lets you consider leaving a little bit earlier, or not just having those additional things because you're not somebody who could sit quietly in retirement because you're not going to fill your time, watching more TV. You might want to fill your time continuing to add value out to the world and helping other people.
Definitely. I mean, Alex Hormozi is a great example. Yeah, he's doing some cool stuff that I think all authors should really watch what he's doing. But yeah, and he's good about it because he's a true marketer, and he's honestly almost too clear about it. He's like, the reason why I'm doing any of this is so that you can get to a $3 to $5 million revenue range, so you can come work with me. Like, it's so clear why he's doing what he's doing. I think there's two big pieces just in the author world in general. Like, I think you're building trust first and foremost, and I think the book is a massive trust builder. I think building content regularly is a trust builder. But then I think you also got to pound the pavement. Like, I hate to say it, but there's so many people I speak with who just think that NBC should be calling them up or the Today Show should be calling them up. And I'm like, I have no idea where your mindset's at. That makes no sense to me. Like, and then you start, cause I'm a big guy about like who studies the successful people. And it's like, Tony Robbins is still pounding the pavement. Like Alex Hormozi, look at him. He's pumping out content left and right. Like the guy's already made it. He's got $100 million. Like he can go retire and do whatever. But like the guy just loves the game.
He's just warming up, man. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. He's just getting started. So there's a disconnect, and it's clear the people I love working with that we have a lot of success already are in that good headspace, and the ones that I just can't seem to get things going are in a different spot. And I don't know. It's something I think you just got to kind of realize yourself one day or another.
I think what you outlined on kind of your pathway there, because as you said, some of the stuff you're figuring out, and I think it's so important that people are okay figuring it out, like not having all the answers, because people get paralyzed wanting all the answers, or they're too inflexible when it comes to the pathway of how they might get there, because they did see, for example, that person who was on, Pick Your News Network or whatever it was show being interviewed, or maybe Oprah gave your book away. I don't know. But it's like the chances of getting there is so difficult that it's like, that's almost like a cherry on top. If it ever happens, maybe there's something there that you get out of it. But if I don't want to, funnels may not be the right word, but if the other things you've set up around it to build trust don't exist, then those things aren't really going to matter anyway. So
Yeah, and I mean, just to quickly wrap on this point, like I'm going through this myself. I have a pretty solid outbound strategy, but there's no trust there. So like, yes, it can transact or it works, but like to get on a phone call, but I'm just like, this person has no idea who I am. Of course they're just so hands offish. Like it makes total sense. And then I see guys like Hormozi or whomever else, and I'm like, I feel like he's my best friend. I've never met him, but like I feel like he's my best friend. And why do I feel that way? Because the guy has built trust.
yeah,
So it's like I have to punch myself or something and be like, dude, you got to build more trust. You got to create more deliverables. You got to be more of value. Like I mean, I think Hormozi coined it, but like you got to make your free shit better than people's paid shit, because when they're wowed by the free stuff, they're going to be willing to go to the paid stuff, and then they're hopefully they're wowed even more by the paid stuff. It's just, we're living in a great period of time where you can get your message out, and freedom of speech is at an all-time high, and you can use any medium in the world, but that's just like the top of the iceberg. Like there's a lot of work that I'm still coming into knowing about that needs to be executed upon. To do it. It's funny, like Hormozi, I mean, not to talk this whole time about him, but he's always like, people ask me, how am I so good at sales? Or what book did you read to get good at sales? He's like, dude, I got good at sales because I did 5,000 like in-person selling sessions. That's how you get good at sales. And it's like, that's the message we got to keep hearing. Like, you got to go do the work. And that just, for me, as my basketball career and all that stuff always comes back into my mind, it's like, that's how you become a great basketball player, a great coach. Like Hurley drove the cheese bus for 9 years at St. Benedict's High School, as a high school coach. And now he's, at the pinnacle of his career now. But like, I don't know. People just want that, silver bullet, which.
Well, I think it's what a lot of people make the mistake is they compare their kind of chapter 1 with somebody's chapter 30.
Yeah.
And they're like, what the hell? Why is that guy doing it? Well, why don't you read his first 29 chapters?
Yeah.
Then you learn how he got to his chapter 30. And there's that gap in realizing and thinking that everything is overnight success, which is not. This person, like you mentioned, Hormozi, went through 5,000, sales meetings, and that says a lot. To kind of wrap this up, and bring it up to what we actually did this episode to begin with. Michael and I wanted to talk about, some books that people should be reading. But you are.
Since it appears you read every book out there, so
yeah. So we want to hear from you. What are 3 books that somebody should read if they want to pursue entrepreneurship? And then what are 3 books that somebody should read just from a career growth perspective, and if they just want to follow maybe a corporate world climbing the ladder?
Yeah. And just, another, I guess, quick note, which I probably should have included in my bio. I was like the worst reading comprehension student ever. Like I could not remember what I read to go answer those questions. And now I get essentially, more or less paid to read. So like no basketball experience, Division I basketball champion, barely could read, like ADD, and now does this. So like, that's my big, at my age message that I'm pushing, that like literally you could just create any opportunity. And your past doesn't have to be the present or the future. Yeah. So books for entrepreneurs. The number 1 book I share with anyone is called The Third Door by Alex Banayan. And it's a book about, Alex, who's a friend of mine now, which is incredible. He just went on this journey to pretty much meet Bill Gates, Pitbull, Quincy Jones, like Lady Gaga, like all these very well-known people, and find out how they got started. Because we're all, we find out about Hormozi when his name's in lights, but like, what was he doing at 18? Or what was Hurley doing at 18 years old? so it's a super interesting book, and it's all about how they took the third door. Like they didn't take, I can get into it more, but like it's a really great book about just taking chances and seeking out opportunities. So that's kind of just like, to not even answer your question, I think that's just like the first book that most people should read. I always recommend that. But for
Funny, I haven't even
entrepreneurs,
heard of that one either. So whenever I hear a book, I haven't
yeah.
even like heard of it. That's great. And
Oh,
it
it's
looks
great.
like, not to call this out, but it sounds like he might be Armenian. Artin's Armenian. I think, if I'm not incorrect here, as I look at
he's
it,
Iranian, actually, I think.
He's Iranian. Okay, got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah,
And he's
cool.
actually, he lives in LA. So I could easily connect you guys if you guys want to do a podcast about him.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's
he's awesome. Yeah, he's like in Venice or something. Not to give away his address now, but
Exactly.
Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, another amazing book. Obviously, the story of Nike just clearly shows what it takes to build a company like that. And unfortunately, the sad parts, like lack of time with family and just not being there for his kids' childhoods and stuff. But that's the price of success sometimes if you're building a business of that size. Another book that I don't share enough, and I really should, is called Start Something That Matters by Blake Mykowski, the guy who started Tom's. And that's a great book because if you want to be or you hear about, I want to go be an entrepreneur, obviously quickly you're probably thinking of Bezos and Elon Musk and money, and big expansion. But this guy built a business with a great social cause and to put shoes on kids' feet that didn't have shoes. So it just gives you that whole other lens of what entrepreneurship could be like. So that's a great book.
I think a lot of people are making this shift. I don't know if it's, don't always like to put it in generational things, but sometimes it happens where I think today people are like, okay, I'm actually good with this smaller business that can just really drive towards impacting people in this positive way versus the mentality in the past where I do think a lot of people looked at it and it's like, billions, they're looking at the big dollars. But now I think people are like, nah, care for my family, have time for the things that I love to do, while at the same time driving a cause or something that I have. So I think we'll see even more and more of those in the future. And yours, I would argue and say, has a relationship to that too, when I hear your story a bit.
Yeah, I mean, now I really, fortunately, with the age of technology, I think you can make big profits and have time freedom and have a family and impact tons of lives. So there's ways. I don't know if those were limited beliefs in past generations or the age of technology has just allowed for new opportunity. But I think 100% today and for the years to come, you can do all those things. Right. So those are a bunch of entrepreneurship books. Another one I'll throw out I like is Beyond the Cloud by Mark Benioff, Salesforce founder. The reason why a couple of those books, they kind of have a theme where it's like the true day one of a business that has turned out to be massive. That's why I love The Third Door too. I don't care when someone becomes successful. Like I want to know literally what was the crap you were eating on a day-to-day basis to get to where you were getting to.
I love those too. It's like the origin stories.
Yeah, exactly. For me, someone who's still in the startup phase, and perhaps always will be, like, just the Bezos day one mentality. I think it gives you just that, I don't know, confidence, self-belief or relatability that like, Phil Knight was in your shoes at one point. He was selling shoes out of his trunk.
100. Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I also like about, Alex and how he steers his story of Hormozi is because you hear that and you hear where they were and you hear that, nope, their actually business was, going under or they weren't going to be able to do it. And it's like, you hear those stories and you're like, oh, okay, I don't have to just jump to, whatever appears to be the success everybody else has. Nobody does. They all start somewhere slowly crawling their way up. Even Bezos' story, it's like, it's amazing how that one, evolved.
Well, I just saw a headline today that Uber just became profitable. Like yesterday.
I was reading too, and they're like, Uber's now the company to watch where it's going to go over the course of the next several years. I'm like, oh, well, there you go. Is WeWork coming next?
Yeah, right.
I believe in them. I bought stock a long time ago. I was like, Uber? This is the company.
Uber, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you told me, and I bought some, and then I lost some money, and I'm like, I don't know if I have an appetite for this much longer.
Yeah.
Keep it. It's going to go up.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for career books, there's a book that one of my master's teachers told me to get. It's called Daniel Pink's book. It's The Adventures of Johnny Bunko. It's like a magna, like one of those like Japanese type books, like with the illustrations. Essentially just like, it's like 10 keys for your first job and like how to kind of take on. So it's a perfect book for like an 18, 20, 22-year-old. 25-year-old who's like just in their first career. I don't think like when you hear about Daniel Pink, you don't think about that book because he's got all of his other ones. But that's like I think one of his first books he pushed out.
I remember seeing that book and being like, "What is this?" It felt, more like, it was going to be some story, some
it's like a comic book,
or whatever. Yeah. So I actually didn't read that one yet, probably because I'm like, I'll stick with his drive and some of the other ones that he has. So yeah, it's funny.
Right.
Okay. Good to know.
So that's a good one. The Go Giver by Bob Berg. Honestly, that could be career and it could be business. That's just being a person of value and just putting, just having that mentality. I think that's just one of the winning formulas for life. So that's a tremendous book. And then honestly, there's a book that I just kind of came across. He's not a well-known author. His name is Mark Sides, and it's called The Pace Process, but it's literally like the career guide for early. It's like the game plan for early career success. So it really fits into that question. Like it's interview skills, cover letter type of stuff. So very more tactical. To more of like a textbook. I mean, not so much. That's the wrong way to put it, but like kind of very practical guide to being successful in your career. But yeah, honestly, so many career books. I think like entrepreneurship books can teach you so much about career and vice versa.
Yeah, they definitely are linked. It's not a clear separation. That's awesome.
I think that's a huge advantage too, Artin and I had, because at that time, similar to you and your background, when you were turned on to these books and other things, well, that's how we were, but within our corporate career. So we're going in there with these mentality. Oftentimes our managers or even VPs and others weren't actually, I don't know, dedicated to that continual learning sort of things. What they picked up was at the job. And I remember when at Disney, they started talking about like things like, radical candor or emotional intelligence. And I'm like, oh yeah, those things, read books on those long ago. Isn't that just normal? That's how we operate here, isn't it? But you realize, no, for a lot of these companies, and a lot of people rely on their company to bring them the things they need to be educated about. And I think it's another big difference between, when we were talking earlier, you guys were mentioning, the NBA versus college basketball versus, maybe, Artin and Owen, how you got play. And then down at the bottom is how I play basketball, which is not very good. Artin can vouch for it. But ultimately, there is this different mentality, I think, of the way that they practice. And, you hear the stories about Kobe and how he practiced. And I think there is that key difference in our careers and entrepreneurship of how people really dedicate themselves to this craft of continually growing and being okay to be able to, keep working it out, pushing themselves to be the best that they can be. So, and on your book topic here, I have to say, I love that only a few of those books have I actually heard about. And it's always interesting to me when you're able to hear some of these other books that I don't think are always the ones that, I don't know, might have found their way out there for people to be aware of, but maybe they're actually not the best on the topics, because back to your point you said earlier and about what you're trying to help people do, sometimes you may have that book that got out there, but maybe it didn't get out there to the world in the way that it could to really help other people. So thank you for sharing those.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much. No, this was a great list. To wrap this up, how can people find you if they're looking for you?
Yeah. Owen Sammarone on LinkedIn, Twitter are my main platforms. Personal brand. And then, of course, Unleash the Knowledge, spelled as it is, literally everywhere you hopefully can find, from Pinterest to TikTok to Instagram. There's a presence everywhere, and there's probably a DM button, and I read them all. So feel free to reach out, and happy to chat with whomever.
Awesome. And if the platform allows, we'll make sure to link to Owen in the comment section as well.
For anyone, by the way, who only came to start, into the world in the past week or two, Twitter, isn't that X now? Isn't this what we call this way? It's so weird to say. I don't even know how you do it. I'm like, or on X, it would sound weird. X, what? Did you finish your sentence? I'm still trying to come to terms with this change, obviously. So
that's a good point, because I talk a lot in terms of like, oh, do you want to do X, Y, Z, or if you do this, like X could be this, and then Y could be that. Like I don't know. I just talk in that type of terms, so that might be the wrong jargon or phrasing to use, because now we have a social media platform with the same name.
Or your ex, talk to my ex. I don't know. Yeah, Anyway, it is interesting.
On X.
I'm so curious how it goes. And do we say we it was a tweet before, which I love the idea of tweeting. But now it's like, do you
It still says tweet though. Like if you launch the Twitter app
yeah.
and you type something
Tweet.
up, the button's still called tweet.
Okay, got it. So you tweet.
Yeah.
All right.
So maybe Elon is looking for a new phrase to use for tweet, but it's so ingrained there.
Yeah.
Anyways, Owen, thank you so much again for giving us your time today. This was a great conversation, and everybody else listening, don't forget to subscribe and follow, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.